In this slideshow, we're going to get started talking about advertising in the 1930s. And this is a period where we see a really dramatic shift in advertising strategies because, of course, this is the period of the Depression following the crash of the stock market in 1929. And that has a profound impact on consumer culture and advertising, as you might expect. And as an example, I want to just show you here some ads for one product, Lux Soap, and the transition that we see from the teens into the 20s and then by the 1930s. So you see the two ads on the left going into these images of women and in these lovely surroundings of the home and having special fabrics, their summer fabrics, and talking about how dainty they are and that they can even be laundered with soap because it's so dainty and you can take care of things. Well, by the 1930s, it's about undie odor, and the sense that your underwear stinks and your clothes stink. And you can see this woman is upset. She's fed up with her marriage. She's just a housekeeper. The home is falling apart. There's a dramatic shift here in the kind of lifestyles that we see illustrated, but in more particular terms, according to what we're concerned with, the appeals that are being made, what the focuses are, and the sensationalism of the content. Now, what do we see in advertising in the 1930s? Well, depression affects the culture consumption and the ad industry. There's a huge increase in the level of unemployment. People aren't making money, they aren't buying things, and that affects the ad industry. They don't have as much money to spend on ads either. And so the response in advertising is that we see there is a return to a more hard sell emphasis and greater sense of sensationalism in the kinds of appeals, the kinds of images that we see, and so on. One of the things that that you can think about in terms of what the look of advertising is and how different it is that in a lot of ways the look itself of advertising in this period is depressed to go along with the Depression. It's far less ornate in terms of the actual images and art that's used. Advertising agencies weren't spending money on art. They didn't have the money to spend on art and hiring artists, so that's one of the first things that got cut. They're much more simple. And because they're relying on hard sell, they can look where the emphasis is really on the text and the claims that are being made. And this image right here I like a lot because it kind of sums up these shifts in a lot of ways, and it's even kind of referring back to the past in the ways that Ivory Soap used to advertise. So again, I'm showing some advertisements for the same product, the same brand, over a period of time. So this is from the middle of the 30s. It's a newspaper ad. So it is black and white. It is simple, but look at how it's referring back to the past. I've always used Ivory Soap for my fine things. Now it costs so little that I can use Safe Ivory Suds for every soap use. So the emphasis isn't just here on Ivory Soap. That's for your dainty things and keeping care of these fine things that you have. That was like the model in the 1920s as this aspirational living. Now it's you can use Ivory Soap for everything. Wash the dishes, wash your hands, wash your clothes. It's that versatile. You can use it for every soap use, not just how you did in the past. And then, of course, if you look down here at the bottom of the ad, it's all about the price. Ivory Soap at the lowest price in 17 years. Use it for face, bath, nice clothes, dishes, all these different things, right? Still selling Ivory Soap, adapting to the culture of the 1930s and the Depression. You're not going to buy a lot of different soaps. We're not going to try to encourage you or suggest that this is just for certain things. It's not a luxury item. It's basic. All right, so again, to look back at some Ivory ads. This is from 1920. And here you see the images of this woman in this fancy dress, elegantly sitting there with this man who looks like he's wearing a tuxedo, judging by the style of the pants he's got on. And it says, silent speaking hands. Be sure they say nice things about you, always. And so, in general, this is a kind of soft sell look that we become accustomed to, where you don't even need all this text. It's just creating this brand image and these associations of luxury and communicating silent speaking hands, a sense of romance associated with Ivory Soap. Then by 1937, look how different this is. This is what we're talking about in terms of sensationalism. Look at the hands on this woman. We go from the silent speaking hands with this gorgeous art to these hands that they look terrible. They look like Frankenstein hands. They look like, I don't know, Walking Dead hands or something. Um, so here it's not about communicate your hands, communicating how lovely they are. You are afraid, you do not want your hands to look like this. So see what it says? Warning, don't let dishwashing give you old hands. Use ivory soap. And this woman, of course, she's saying she wants a younger looking hand. She's afraid that people are going to think she's old. And her friend is saying, if only she knew it's her dishpan hands. That's what makes her look so old. And the art in these is terrible. If you search for some of these online, you will see how it's like they've taken a Sharpie marker to these images and made the hands just look grotesque. But this is typical and just so different from what's happening less than 10 years earlier. And again, also think about what we talked about with 20s and that idea of constructive discontent. You don't know that something's wrong with you. Now you do because you've seen our ads. And we, over and over again, we see that signaled in these kinds of ads where there's a friend there that's going to tell them what they don't recognize. Or a child that's so honest they can't help but tell them that they stink or they have dishpan hands or whatever it might be. Now we see that, and Ivory is going to fix that problem for us rather than just be this luxury that we might want to have to make us look nicer or more romantic. Okay, so in the 30s, we see two key appeals. An emphasis on, just an overt emphasis on price, how it's the lowest price, for example, in 17 years, as well as an emphasis on economic insecurity. Now, those two things, of course, are linked, but here's what we're talking about with economic insecurity. Playing on that notion of you don't want to cause offense, you don't want to smell, you don't want to look dirty, you don't want to look old, because that's going to cost you money, right? You're not going to get the promotion at work. You're not going to be chosen to be put in front of the store or what have you, because you don't have this product or you've got these problems. So whatever the product is, it can solve those problems for you, or at least if you don't have it, you better be careful, right? So in any way, the idea here is that the emotional appeals are going to have to do with people's lack of security and their fears about the economy. This being this overwhelming sense, rather than what we saw in the 20s of being modern and a higher standard of living and so forth. Okay, so one visual strategy that we see in this period too that becomes popular is what's called the news appeal approach, where an ad simulates a news story, right? And this is a funny one, I think, because it's about Ivory soap and it says, matron of honor shocks bride. It's not all moonlight and roses, says the bride's best friend. Wait till your hands get all rough from dishwashing. You know, the idea that the bride is going to find out something that she wasn't aware of was going to take place when she gets married. And here's another one on toothbrushes, a page full of news on keeping teeth brighter. So it's just, again, playing with this notion of looking like a newspaper story rather than just an ad. And a variation of that style is what's called the true story format, which borrows from the popularity of tabloid newspapers and magazines in the 30s. This is when tabloids really became popular, and they had stories about, you know, crimes and celebrities, and in a lot of ways similar to what we see today. Less focused maybe on celebrities and more on sensational crimes. But this is mocking those styles. Society girl robbed of really white teeth. Right? She's not actually robbed. And it's got bars over her eyes like you would see in tabloids to supposedly protect, you know, the innocent and so forth. So it's interesting for us because look how this is combining these things that we've talked about. A special money back offer, really cheap samples, as well as getting people's attention through looking like a newspaper ad, and the sensationalism of tabloids, borrowing from the sensational of tabloids, even if it's in a comic way to advertise toothpaste.